I have a very, very special guest on today, Leslie Chen, who is going to talk to us a bit about one of my most passionate most passionate areas to explore, which is when science meets the mystic. And anyone that has followed me for a while knows that this is something that I really am fascinated by. And obviously, anyone from the manifesting community or that's followed me for a while, or this is a wide consensus in the spiritual community, is that we always emphasize identity, state selection. Consciousness is all about who you're aware of being, and your outer experience really being a reflection of who do you believe you are, what do you identify as, or who do you identify as being, your thoughts, your beliefs that are connected to that particular state or identity. Now, there's also, if we think about it, because obviously there's a big emphasis on how you're thinking, and even Neville Goddard talked about that, and a lot of teachers like thinking as if, being the version. And so now we have a very special guest that has for many, many years, she's very conscious as well, but she has specialized in with a neuroscience background in actually helping people to break the habit of being their old self. We could argue, like Joe Dispenza would say that, but from a science perspective, help people break loops and patterns and shift their identity in order to break free from food addiction and weight issues, etc. for the last 10 years. So she's brilliant. Okay, and so she knows all about both sides, and we're going to talk about that. And then, Leslie, I'm very, very excited to have you. So thank you so much for giving me the time. We've got people already joining, which is fantastic. Hello from Paris. Fantastic.
Wow.
So Leslie, we're going to talk about the function of the brain, which I'm so excited about, because I think, we are seeing more and more of this in science meets the mystic. Okay, this is definitely something that is happening a lot, and the understanding is obviously a lot of people are very well versed in the idea, or they, who follow a lot of content. They're like, okay, I need to, my subconscious is kind of running programs, and I need to change my state of being. And that would be like changing a belief. And a very common narrative is, okay, repetition of thought, repetition of thought, repetition of thought, repetition, right? Like affirm, 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 affirm. And some people find that that works really quickly for them. Okay, and some people tend to struggle with that. Okay, and that's definitely a common thing I've seen in my community and across the board. Some people are like, well, how come someone can just like affirm and suddenly their entire reality changes, and other people are like affirming like maniacs in the mirror, like, I have it, I have my $1 million, I have my love, or whatever. And somehow there's something going on in the brain, or in terms of the state or the identity that they're selecting. There's like a fight maybe between old thoughts, old identity, and what they're selecting. So from a neuroscience perspective, I want to geek out on this and get your experience with what you've done with coaching, your understanding of what's going on in the brain, and also like how we can maybe help people to shortcut this and like get rid of all this quote. I don't like to tell people that they have the resistance, because I think we can select the identity that doesn't, right? But like, what would be your tips and your deep diving into why this might be happening from a neurological perspective?
So we have a full package to unpack today.
We
and I'm
do.
excited, Kelsey, and thank you so much for having me here.
Thank
Now,
you.
even before I get into neuroscience, as I shared with you earlier, I've been a lifetime manifester. And so far, I mean, the past almost 40 years of life, I think I've manifested a lot of great things that used to be like finding impossible, right? Big and small things, life-changing events, life-changing career events, business, etc. So neuroscience is extremely interesting because it addresses how the brain works. And sometimes this is a joke that I say to myself, maybe I studied neuroscience to understand more about how manifestation works. What is the right behind the scene mechanism?
Right.
So to your question, I'm gonna dive in straight like directly. The question that you asked me, the first question you asked me is, what is preventing some people from manifesting, from getting into that state, from
Or
experiencing the same
manifesting
thing?
what they prefer versus
What they
what
prefer, exactly.
Because we're always manifesting. We can both
Absolutely.
agree, right?
Right.
Our
Right.
outer experiences are manifestation of a state, right?
Exactly.
Always. Yeah.
So, what is stopping somebody from stepping into the state they want to be? Let's just put it this way, okay, or
Yeah.
experience the thing that they desire to have. Um, one of the multiple reasons, but one of the thing about addressing from brain science that I want everybody to know is that this is what I had from quote unquote from my textbook in neuroscience. Okay, we human beings are animals after consistency. And what that means is whenever there is a clash, contradiction between what you believe and how you behave, how you want to behave, your experience and behavior, okay, your brain automatically bends over the behavior to match with the belief. It is on the textbook. The second part of that I paraphrased it a little bit. The thing is, I do remember when I first saw that, it stuck with me for so long, just right from that instant. Because if you think about it, I'm just gonna use the pen here to illustrate my point.
Yeah.
Not this belief, my lipstick, you got this series of behaviors, right?
Yeah.
It's the brain bends over the behaviors
Uh-huh.
to match with the belief. It's never the other way round. Okay. Now, in my coaching, what helps people with binge eating disorder or overeating or weight problems, this is what we always see. And I think that's a very good illustration for this theory.
Right.
You do whatever diets you want, you enforce whatever regimen that you want, but you don't believe that you can be naturally happy and holistically healthy and fit. One day, that contradiction, which is causing the behavior to be bent over, will manifest like, oh, I don't feel motivated.
Hmm.
You translate that into the lack of motivation or lack of momentum or feeling resigned. You don't understand why. It is because your brain is working in a manner to make sure that your behaviors match with what you believe.
Because it's familiar. It's familiar. It's
It's
not so
not
much
just
that one would be
familiar. Being familiar is a different thing. It's actually a separate topic because that's where we're going to talk about the neural pathways,
right,
right? It's
right,
like
right.
on autopilot. It's on autopilot, running on autopilot. But I'm just talking about what you're believing. And what you're believing, yes, it's sponsored, it's rooted in, not rooted, but it has been supported by a set of neural pathways. But it actually goes from a lot of experiences. For some people, it might be childhood.
Yeah.
For some people, it
Yeah.
might be some reasonably emotionally charged event,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's the number one thing. When it comes to affirmation or manifesting the experience you want, I think there's a huge overlap between what neuroscience says on that front and what the mystic world is saying, like Never God was saying, when it comes to you have to be in that state. We can talk
Right.
about what it means by being in that state later, but this lack of consistency overall, I believe, is what disabled a lot of people from
It's the
gaining the experience.
consistency. It's the consistency, right? And it's like a lot of people give up because when they feel an element of resistance, which I liken in my teachings, and you can
Yeah,
definitely tell me the scientific perspective, but most people would say it's a battle of identity, right? Versus it's one identity versus another. And one identity has a way of thinking, and another identity has another way of associating thinking and identifying. But what will
yeah,
happen is your old awareness of being thinks in a certain type of way, and you're going to come up against resistance, which if we want to, and you can explain it definitely better from the brain mind, you know way more than I do, okay, for sure. Like but in terms of, that's why they say like repetition, consistency, it normalizes something versus the ego mind or the bouncer, some people would like to say, between like what you're consciously selecting that's unfamiliar and the subconscious they need to meet. That's what Neville was talking about, or Joseph Murphy, the two meeting together. When they do meet and there isn't that level of resistance, there's in the very least an acceptance of the belief, the subconscious, it must be made manifest. But what's happening is you're being pulled to like an old identity, an old way of thinking, and people freak out. They think that this is like it's not going to work because it's almost like they're so in the habit. It's too familiar, right? Like they can't
So
let it go. Mm.
yeah, so we're talking about two different types of consistency here.
Right,
So what you're talking about in terms of robotic affirmation is actually
right,
about the consistency of effort. That's
right.
not the consistency I'm talking about here.
Yeah,
So one person, Alan, that's what his name is. Yes, asked the
yes,
question whether consistency equals persistence. I'm gonna answer that question right away. Okay, the level of consistency I'm talking about is not the level of effort.
right,
I'm talking about the natural consistency that is naturally maintained between the belief and the behavior.
right.
If you believe that you are an unhealthy person, if you don't believe that you're worthy enough to, live healthily or eat well, you just simply are not going to do it. So that part of consistency is actually naturally maintained. So the question, like at this point of discussion, the consistency we're talking about is how do we actually inspire the type of belief, right? The type of thought framework, the type of self perception or perception about the world that will organically inspire the behaviors and the experience that are in line with that. The alignment is the consistency I'm talking about, which is what the brain is seeking.
Well, this is why, I mean, I emphasize self-concept, and I think
Yeah,
that's what you pointed out versus
yeah,
like and you can have, at least in my experience, Leslie, and like you can you're free to disagree, but in terms of the manifesting world, people have had lots of success, and I certainly did early on when I started testing things out, that
yeah,
I could force things into my awareness by robotically affirming, but they wouldn't necessarily last, right? Because focus and attention can bring things into your environment, but things will not sustain because my self concept wasn't, my identity wasn't in alignment, my belief wasn't in alignment, and therefore things would come and go, or I would react or behave in a certain type of way where I would push things away or not. The trajectory would change yet again. Do you know what I mean? So I think that you're
yeah,
right. I
because
think
your perception changes and the
right,
consistency is always there in the
right,
sense that the consistency between what you believe in yourself about yourself and the experience and behavior that will follow that type of consistency is always going to be there. So
right.
if you shift your starting point, your perception or your belief, yeah, you're going to see a shift in experience just because of the consistency. That's not like neuroscience explanation of it, that's my explanation of it
Yeah, yeah,
based on
yeah.
neuroscience theories that I've learned. Yes.
So then, can you explain? So, for example, because I know obviously a lot of teachers, and we've had a private discussion, we talked about like
Yeah,
aligning, our thoughts are emotionally charged, and then those thoughts then obviously go to the subconscious, which is connected to some kind of a belief and an identity, and then things
yeah,
are manifest, right? Now, I have managed to manifest a lot of things from a level of neutrality. So, a big thing in the manifesting community is your thoughts create, which is why people say repeat, 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 repeat.
uh,
Now, I've managed to just play around a little bit. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to like talk about
yeah,
what I do. And I've messed around with
yeah.
things that were like, okay, but even things that are wildly different to what I've experienced day to day, but I haven't had
Yeah.
too much emotional charge, but I would argue that I haven't had too much resistance in a sense.
Mm.
I've just been like, okay, no, this is how it is. And
So you're
I've said
saying
it.
you were in a state of resistance even when you were trying to manifest that experience.
Well, I think that it's just like this natural acceptance. So there's still an emotional charge to that
Yeah,
thought. Like if I'm saying, okay, look, I am like this now. Like, I mean,
yeah,
the emphasis in the consciousness community is I am that I am, right? Which is identity. Okay. And that identity is in the very least a belief in self. So that's the thing that people do in the sense to override all of the crap in the very least, it's like I've got to have a faith in self in the very freaking least, right? And
yeah,
that can at least eliminate all of this going back and forth and overriding every thought that comes in. Okay,
yeah,
like literally, because that I think that would be an interesting thing that we can go into in this discussion, Leslie, because what my community tends to deal with, the ones that are really
Yeah.
struggling. Again, I
Yeah.
don't like to create the assumption it's a struggle, but
Right.
they have an issue where they're fighting and battling every freaking thought and
Yeah.
everything needs. And I think that's been an issue in the manifesting community where people are like, my thoughts need to be perfect because my thoughts are the thing that if I don't have perfect alignment of my thoughts, then I'm
Yeah.
not going to have my experience. So, in
Yeah.
your view, how do we, because we're essentially just overriding an old identity, but we can shift moment by moment just by coming back and saying, okay, look, a thought is a thought. Okay, but it does have an emotional charge. Should we give it that?
Mm,
And now
mm.
and everything is either positive, negative, neutral. It's totally subjective. Am I right? Like it's perspective driven. So to change an experience, you would need to either give something power or not give something power. And then the outside is going to reflect what you're reinforcing and from what perspective or what level of
That's a
energy.
Kelsey, that is, first of all, that is a very big question, but I'm gonna break it down. I know we're having a conversation on natural flow
Okay,
something. We
I'm
just
going
go.
to bring it down. What would
We're
be
trying to touch a bit. Let me break it down here. Okay. So basically, what you're saying is that how am I going to manifest something I want when I'm actually resisting it? I think
right?
this is actually a very good question.
I think it's a
It
great question.
even in my coaching, because I deal with the situation, a very tough situation. People have been having tug of wars for years, and it's a relationship with food. Should I eat it? Should I not eat it? And if
Mhm.
I eat it, then there's a lot of guilt, which fires what fuels addiction,
Right.
etc. Right? So they want to be healthy, they want to be eating right, but how do they not resist it? The thing is, how am I gonna? I'm going to just highlight in this way, okay? It is not the technique. I think it's the same thing, very much the same thing in manifestation. It's not the technique or the information or the knowledge that matters. It's a state that matters.
Bang.
And
Yes.
and let me tell you why. Because when you are questioning yourself, let's say using those information, you're thinking about what I've done wrong,
Yeah.
right? I want to correct this. Oh, I had a thought that contradicts with my manifestation or goal, however you put it. What you're actually setting your brain into, it's a state of, we call it judgment loop.
Right.
Okay.
Which is
So
an identity in itself.
hold on.
Correct.
Let
Yeah.
me
Am
let
I
me
right?
finish this
Yeah.
thought. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I might forget.
Yeah. Yeah. No, go on. Go on.
Okay. So what happens is that it trains your brain to be very good at spotting errors and correcting errors. And what's that called is the error monitoring network within the brain. And I say network because it is different parts of the brain networks, the circuits that are lighting up for you to be in that state. And it's not just about neural pathways that are working in that state. It's actually about the whole series of experience from behavior to like physical and to emotional experience. And once you are in a state, the state actually works like pretty much like a program, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're gonna experience a lot of my clients experience that. A lot of people trying to manifest things experience that as well, like zigzags. Oh, I've done it wrong, and then overcompensate, and then overcorrect. Oh, I've done it wrong again, right?
Well,
Contradiction,
you shift in and
resistance.
out of states. You shift states.
That's not well. I mean, you can say, yeah. Let's not mingle terminology here because
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to use the word state, but it's a different in a different context. So let's
Right.
not mix it up in a discussion because I think it's very important for people to understand the distinction here.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens is that you're going to see this zigzag in your thoughts, like, oh, I've done right. Oh, I caught a flaw. I have to correct it. Then you overcorrect, and then you overcompensate, and you feel bad, and you feel whatever, right? So whenever you feel not enough or done something wrong, it's going to trigger the emotional experience that reinforces that state.
Mhm.
So it's the brain kind of driving you into certain kind of experience without you being able to do like Not that you can't do anything about it, but a lot of time it happens in the unconscious way, right? So these kind of behaviors and the outcomes which are linked to these behaviors in this way is sort of like you can think of this as programmed
Right.
by the state because of the state. Okay. So what you do in a situation is to activate a different state that is sorry, supported by a different neuronal experience.
Mhm.
Okay. So what I always teach my people is to switch from a state of information and trying to get everything right into a state of release and neutrality. Because when you are telling yourself, I'll just give you more of the concrete example so that we can add some context to it.
Yeah.
Okay. You had an ice cream. In the past, you'll be like, I shouldn't have been eating it. And you will be anxious for hours or maybe days, right? Depending on your state. And that triggers a whole different state. I was talking about the error monitoring state because you're now sharpened, your brain is sharpened to find flaws and catch them and correct them. Now, if in the same situation, you just release it. And here's one thing a lot of people don't get it, both in manifestation and in like their relationship with food. The single ice cream is not going to have any power to make or break your progress. What happens, what matters is what you do, how you react to it, what you do afterwards.
Mhm.
Okay? Now, manifestation, I believe, is the same. When you have a contradicting thoughts on the act, okay, that one single instance should not have the overall impact on the ultimate goal and your ultimate progression should you stop here. Okay? So, excuse me. So, when you release and relax, what happens is that your brain is automatically in a let's switch into a different state. For example, your prefrontal cortex that's meant for clarity and forward looking momentum. All right, looking to the future, planning, etc., or manifesting. You can put it that way, right? It's now re-engaged. Your amygdala, which is for emotional regulation, is now calmed. Just a few examples so that you know what is the underlying work underneath the terminologies. Okay.
And that's how you break the loop. The
You
loop. The
break the
loop.
loop because now you're in a different state.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is a lot of people feel, oh, my intelligence really is important. It defines me. My behaviors defines me.
Mhm.
None of that is mistaken. But truly, what ultimately defines you is your state, the state of being. You're a fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. A few years ago, he said something that is vastly profound. He said, if you're in a bad mood, no, if you're having a negative emotion for a day, that's a bad mood. If you're experiencing this negative emotion for 3 months, that becomes your temperament.
Mhm.
And if you have the same emotion for a year, that becomes your personality. What he's essentially saying is that it puts your brain into that particular state that will mirror and project different behaviors and experience. And that's what
Your
we're saying.
personality creates your reality, basically, right? Which is what he was saying. It's
Your
like
state,
yeah,
your
your
brain
state.
state, the
But
state of your brain.
because you're going
Please.
to be also, and you could probably weigh in with the reticular activating system in the sense of what is synchronicity, right? And that can go both ways. It can go everything's subjective, but positive, negative, neutral, whatever meaning we're giving. But if we're in a state and we're now, that's what we identify with, we're going to see synchronistic things. We're going to be filtering on the basis of.
Let's just put it this way. Let's not just focus on synchronicity because we can control that. When we say, oh, with synchronicity, we're actually being a little controlling without realizing it, if you think of it.
Oh yeah,
But let's
with
say we're
signs,
open to possibilities.
right?
Will be much more possibilities. Okay. Now, so that's what I wanted to say. It's the state that determines what kind of physical, emotional experience you're gonna have. And behind the scene is the neurons wiring and firing together every
Mhm.
single nanosecond. Okay. But tell me, is this different state is going to give you a different reality by triggering different or enabling different kind of experience, like physical, sensory, emotional? Absolutely.
Personally, I know that. I mean, I
Yeah,
can see that a state shift can happen faster than what you would imagine, but I feel like the mistake people make is that they feel like a shift in. First of all, I feel that we are some people are, or society generally has conditioned people
of
to be
course.
more,
Yeah,
right? Am I right? It's like a societal thing as well. Fear of disappointment, fear of the worst case scenario. So when
yeah,
something we get into a state, it's hard. We're more conditioned to look for more of that versus
yeah,
saying, okay, this is a temporary
yeah,
state that I can
yeah.
shift like that. Like I don't need my environment to control me or the way I'm perceiving. I can shift the perception and the state and the environment, and the way I'm experiencing it can change with me. And I
Yeah,
think people find that very hard.
yeah.
Personally, I think, and you would be the same because you're a seasoned practicer of this, like how fast things can shift when you just stop persisting. I think
Oh
that
my
is like
God.
right. Stop persisting and persisting and persisting. That's why I mean,
I'll
we
tell you
talked.
this,
Yeah,
that in terms of how fast things can be, some person who can be like, it happens a lot to my clients. The person has been a chronic binge eater with binge eating disorder. We're talking about people with actual binge eating disorder. This is very
mm,
different from just overeating the snacks.
sure.
Daily binge eater for years. When they start the work of getting into a different state by having in so one thing that we do with clients is an elevated sense of self, that
Mm.
kind of practice. Okay. The binge just stop right here on the day they enter the process. And it never comes back.
Because it's a coping mechanism for something. Because it's something to do with it.
The
I mean, look, you tell me because you're more. It's a medical thing as well. It's a science thing, but I mean, at least as far as I mean, I teach self concept as the baseline. And
yeah,
then I say, you're manifesting a specific person, a relationship. And I believe nothing's impossible. So I think you can turn around a relationship in a second. You can manifest anyone back, etc. And I've
yeah,
tested it. This is where science might be skeptical. Okay. So but at the same time,
yeah,
and we talked earlier in the live stream about creating neutrality, and the issue whether we're talking about food or we're talking about any object of desire, or how we're relating or identifying to something, there is something going on in terms of something seeming like good, bad, hard, unattainable, difficult, and then it's our personal way of relating to it that is then manifesting a certain type of experience, because we are always manifesting, but people say that they're obsessive. So let's just say in the case of food, so the healthy relationship, or the version of the person that loves them to show up and give them the love that they want, because this is always very popular on my channel, it's available if you subscribe to what I've tested and what we cut, where science goes, look,
yeah,
whatever. Okay. But
yeah,
what's happening is that they're creating resistance between them and their desire, and they're obsessing, and they're going up and down like a yo-yo in relation to that desire. And they're still manifesting, because they're manifesting either a hell of a lot of how they're observing that person in relation to them, unattainable, difficult, doesn't love me,
yeah,
doesn't want me, or they're going in and out, right? And this is
yeah,
also what people experience when they don't work on the self concept, or being in the habit or the state of feeling
yeah,
consistently like that thing. There's a level of neutrality, not that you can't love someone, but do you agree it's like and that's definitely what I emphasize. It's like neutrality. So if we were to say that a state is a state, which means that anything can be accessible through identity, perception, right? A belief, okay? And everything is on the outside must then reflect it, right? To a level. Okay, science can be skeptical, like
this is interesting. Kelsey, this is interesting because sometimes people don't know, they aren't aware. By trying to achieve one goal, they're actually going towards the opposite direction without
sure,
realizing it.
sure.
This you brought it up, and that reminds me of a conversation I had with. I think most people here should know, probably most, right? I'm not gonna assume, but Bob Proctor,
Yeah, I love
who
Bob
is
Proctor. Yeah.
right. So years ago, I was having a one-on-one conversation with his son, Brian Proctor, and because his dad is used to be such a manifestation guru and a self-development, self-mastery expert. So I took the opportunity and asked Brian, what did your dad say about weight loss? Because this is my industry, right? I wanted to understand, let's see, just out of curiosity, what did he say about it? And Brian said, my dad actually said something that was quite interesting. When you say you want to lose weight, think about what your brain immediately want when you lose something. It is to find it back, right? Now that is still that is the mystics kind of like
Yeah.
explanation about the time. I actually totally agree, because when it comes to the having the kind of resistance, let's say you want to have a good relationship with food, you can't have a good relationship with anybody if you feel anxious and stressed out about it, or if you don't trust it. People say, I want money. I talk about financial independence and freedom with people a lot.
Mm.
Um, a group of friends, just kind of low key kind of conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're pretty honest with each other about where we are and what kind of thoughts we have about it. Now, this is a common scenario that I've seen in those discussions, is that if money is the issue that have been triggering a lot of frustration or stress in your household, or it is impacting different parts of your life. For example, your child is starting to get stressed out, sensing that it's a problem that you stress over, you're stressed with, right?
Mhm.
Are you gonna have a good relationship with it? No,
Right.
you can't. You can't have a good relationship with it. If you think about food as an enemy, you're never gonna get out of toxic relationship with it. And one thing that I do with my clients, which totally shift their like perception about this. So perception matters because it's a form of belief, okay?
Sure.
It is that if you think about, when did you start this emotional eating or this food addiction or binge eating thing? That's probably when you were very lonely, when
Yeah.
you were at the low, maybe the lowest point of life, and nobody in the world is hearing you. So you got food there.
Comfort.
You had comfort
Mm.
provided by food. So back at that time, it was the dear friend. You had this relationship with it because you needed it and it provided you help. That's where that's the origin of this relationship.
Mhm.
Now it's just a time where the old friend and the old model of working with each other or dealing with each other is no longer fitting your current situation. So what you need to think of in your mind is, I'm going to draw a line. It's not about bashing it. It's not about
Yeah.
abandoning it,
Or that you
because that
can't have it,
backfires.
or even that you can't
Or
have
you
it. If
can't
you
have it. I can't hang out with this friend. No, no. You're busy. And you can say that, let's hang out with each other like once every 6 months or 4 months. That's up to you. But it's about coming to a new term. It is not about being guilty or feeling it's an enemy or feeling distrusting it or not trusting yourself,
yeah.
because the mindset is what again set the state.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is where people are not necessarily honest. They kind of bullshit themselves. With the conscious manifesting, I think I really am. I think we are completely limitless, and there's things that I cannot
Yeah,
freaking explain. And I think that's where science, there's some whole science is catching up and discussing this with mystics, but there's
yeah,
stuff that's unexplainable where I mean,
yeah,
I think we are limitless, only limited by our belief, and each state is either limited or freed by
yeah,
certain beliefs. Now, on the other hand, I think people bullshit themselves a little bit, like they're saying one thing, but they don't accept how they're identified with a thing. Okay. So I think that, sure, we're manifesting all the time. So you can manifest a person. There's people that are manifesting relationships all the time, or kind of a relationship, or it's up and down, or it's whatever. It's still their manifestation because it's coming
yeah,
from the state. Now,
yeah,
there's a lot of people that are manifesting, particularly in my area, it's about like they want someone that broke up with them, which, by the way, I always emphasize, like, we shift states, we can shift states so
Yeah.
fast. And if we
Yeah.
have that discipline of decision
Yeah.
and self-belief, things
Yeah.
can turn around like
Yeah.
like unbelievable,
Yeah.
like unexplainable and not logical. Not
I've had that
logical at all.
experience too.
Oh, unbelievable.
So
Like,
I
and
totally agree.
totally, right? But
Yeah.
they're bullshitting themselves because they're looking at the reflection, perpetuating that reflection, but declaring something else instead of just saying it's all a decision away and a moment and a selection of state, and all I need is the conviction of that state, and knowing also that that previous state and that reflection was me as well,
Yeah.
essentially, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is where people have the problem. So I think this is sure, like I said to you earlier, I think and this is, again, we're weighing in
Yeah.
on different areas, and so I'm
Yeah.
mystic. But this whole where we're affirming, I mean, I've tested that out. I've definitely forced things into my awareness just by being like robotic affirmations and things.
Yeah.
But in relation to the desire, I had to look at self concept and state, because things can come and go or not,
You
or
know,
things can manifest
yeah.
in a weird way. You get patchy, weird stuff coming up because you haven't shifted
Yeah.
your core identity in relation to the subject, which is also what you do. Like, you shift people's identity in relation to food, in
I'll tell
relation
you
to
this.
self and food.
In order to change your relationship with anything, you're gonna have to change one or both of the two things.
Mm.
One is how you look at that thing, and how you look at yourself. That's the other.
Well, that's
You
I
got
feel the neutrality thing is what we talked about, because I think that this is the issue that a lot of people have. I mean, the consciousness community definitely emphasizes, one, that God consciousness, that you're eternal, what you are really the universe, you're beyond even your body or your identity, right? Like, I mean, even like Joe Dispenza would talk about, you're not your identity, you're not your thoughts, you're not your you're not anything like that, right? But essentially that you have everything within you at the acceptance of it and the state, right? And so, but the problem is that people are putting things outside of them, as they're giving them certain meanings, or they're feeling that they're unattainable, or they are feeling that they have to over effort, or they're giving them an excess importance over and above. So that's what creates all this resistance and this, you know, right?
Thinking of meaning, there's a very interesting thing I like to share. Okay. So when it comes to meaning, your brain actually responds to meaning or perception. Let's use the word perception, okay? Much more than what the reality really is.
100%.
The perception. Now, there have been, I'm going to have to say this because it's such a fascinating study done by researchers at Yale University. It's regarding how your physiology actually respond to perception. So it's food related, okay?
Uh-huh.
46 people, there were 46 participants joining this experiment. They broke into two groups and they were given the same milkshake. It's a very same drink, but there's one caveat. On one drink, or for one group, it says something like, I think, light or something that has a clear indication of calorie being 140 calories. The other indicated something, 640 calories, if I remember accurately. And it's the label says something. It's like overindulgence. That word overindulgence definitely there to indicate this is calorie rich and heavy. Okay, exactly right. So it's creating different perception.
100%.
Now, what happens is that after a few hours, the researchers measured the ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone
Mhm.
of your body. And the people who believed this is a light drink all had the indicator showing that they're really hungry. And all those people with the ghrelin level, which actually signalizes
Hunger levels.
satisfaction,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
are those who believed that this is a six something hundred calorie drink.
And it was the same drink. It
It's
was
the
the same.
same drink if you think about it. And actually, Yale is not the first. This is not the first experiment talking about addressing this. Before that, way before that, BBC did a documentary. It's the
Mhm.
same setting. The only difference is that the 12 pairs of twins.
Mhm.
So they're highly identical, right? Just to rule out some of the variables. I couldn't find that study because the documentary was taken down, but the Yale study is still there. It's fascinating. Just think about it. It doesn't matter what the reality is. What matters is your perception about
Perception.
the reality. That is enough to change how your body responds. And we're not talking about this emotional feeling or empty feelings here. We're talking about hormone. We're talking about biomarkers. You see what I'm talking about?
But you can, even if it seems completely illogical, at any point just choose another perception,
The
even if it
same
just seems completely contrary
that
to
I
what your
can't say.
perception was. Well, I
Honestly,
mean,
this is probably some place that we will have to diverge because
right.
there's no evidence showing that. And if you don't believe in that, that means resistance, and it's hard for you to get into that state.
Well, this is where the bridge is, right? Like, I mean, I think essentially, and that comes down to personal belief and testing things. Like,
Yeah,
and this is obviously the very common theme with anyone
yeah,
that's had success with conscious manifesting. So, first is awareness. Why do I perceive things in a certain way, and why am I having a certain experience?
yeah.
Then the next thing is if I was just forget that, and it might seem crazy to the old identity, the way I perceived something, I'm just going to decide to
Now,
detach
yeah.
and just choose a new perception. Like, how would this identity perceive? Forget that. And
Here's the thing.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I, as a person, have manifested a lot of crazy things in my life.
Same.
Billionaire clients.
Same.
Uh,
Same.
Okay, so things that come to me for no reason, for the reason I couldn't move into a different country on full ride scholarship. I was paid like 33,000 US dollars back in 2005 just for me to study here. And I
Mhm.
wasn't even the top of the line student back in my country, China. So those things I started manifesting very at a very young age. Okay. And partner, um, house, whatever you think of, I've manifested it. Internship in Italy at the world famous company, and they only hired two from the world, and I was one of them. But there's a line because the conversation today is about neuroscience, how
Sure.
neuroscience support this. So there are
Sure.
some lines I'm not going to pass. Doesn't mean that I
Totally.
am denying, you
Totally.
know, doesn't mean that I'm denying, I'm not denying, but I want to be able to speak from a place of evidence.
Sure. And I think that that's why I wanted you to come on for sure, because I
Yeah,
think that there's also skeptics. There's a lot of skeptics that are like, well, I don't know how this works. So at least I wanted to get a
yeah,
perspective from someone that does. You and I both, we go beyond it and we've had our own experiences,
yeah,
but it is interesting to get at least the scientific perspective or the neuroscience perspective,
yeah,
because even you mentioned neural pathways earlier, and I'm going to tell
yeah,
you, at least, and again, because I don't have your background, it's a very common narrative in the consciousness community that the reason why we do repetition is to
yeah,
override resistance to think from the end. And it's likened to create accessing a new neural pathway or programming new neural pathway, a way of thinking and being, in order to have a different experience reflected or a perspective then
right.
reflected, right? So, what are your thoughts then? So, from a neuroscience perspective, or what have you seen in terms of your coaching? I
Yeah.
mean, you've probably
Repetition
found,
matters.
yeah,
Repetition
persistent.
matters. But
So,
in my actual coaching, repetition is used more of reinforcing an event that has already happened. So let me just give you some context. People talk about affirmation, right? I just don't use much of an affirmation in my program because I know a lot of people before they affirm, they already resist. That's just their
okay.
brain's natural mechanism when your belief is not there.
Mhm.
But what I do instead is when the person has already shown milestones, which is already, fact-based evidence, right? It has already happened. So what I ask them to do is to repeat the fact in multiple ways at the same time. So the brain is not going to fight it because the brain knows this is the actual experience I've had.
an experience that they have or an experience that they wish to have?
Already had. For example, I'll give you more context here. If somebody who uh, used to be a binge eater many years, and today he went to this event. This is what I just heard last week. Oh, went back to my mother's house, which is where usually disaster happens. And
It's the association with the mother's house
it's
that's
association.
motivating.
But there is actually what happened there is she was able to just eat with a lot of peace without overthinking about food, and just happened to be able to like stand up and stop eating when she felt satiated without going over the board. So
Mm,
that's an actual experience that she has had. Her brain is not going to fight it because the brain is conscious. It is now in my reality. But the tricky part for most people is that, for all of us actually, is that our brain has a negativity bias built in. So what happens is that it will remember majority of the negative events and forget the positive events that have happened. So
mm,
your self-perception is actually not comprehensive at all because of this natural selection, and filtering mechanism happening.
mm,
So in this situation, it's really important for you to sit down with yourself and be observant. What are some of the things that have happened that is in line with where I want to go? And this is your perfect opportunity because this thing has happened. Your brain is not going to try to believe it.
mm,
So this is one way that you can bypass the belief, the friction. The client, when they initially start this process, they had a few instances, right, where peace and detachment neutrality is seen.
mhm,
What naturally happens is within probably 1 or 2 weeks, they will forget about it. Brain filters it out because
mhm.
the belief is not there.
Right.
The belief is I have no control over food. The brain retains memory. It's more likely to retain memory.
Mhm.
That is in line with a belief. It's
Sure.
called confirmation bias.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
sure.
And then, so naturally, they will forget it. So, this is a critical moment for you to sit down and maybe you write it down. This is what happened. And you repeat what has been done already instead of affirming or trying to write things down. I find this is a much better way because there's the least resistance. You don't even need to believe it. But when you have repeated for a number of times,
Mhm.
the belief is there.
Right. Well, that is something that's a consensus across your world and
Absolutely.
mine. But
Repetition is key.
it is repetition or consistency in reselecting identity, which even Joe Dispenza talks about. Because, and I'm interested to hear from you because you do deal with trauma or addiction, etc. I mean, Joe Dispenza different because he's mystic with marrying in some scientific principle, right? But he does talk about like studies show that consistently returning to the traumatized past was not helpful, but consistency in
I
identifying
totally
as
agree.
right. But you need to at least to not keep giving the power, right? Because of the brain and the way it's been wired, the firing and the rewiring, we need to acknowledge and then we need to take the power away from it and say, I don't identify with that anymore, right? Like, I think that's sort of what I was getting at earlier in the stream, where it was like, well, what is an intrusive thought? An intrusive thought means whatever the hell it's just a thought, right? Like it's the same way we have a perception or a meaning and connection to anything. But if you give power, and I think we had a private conversation, we were talking about manifesting just generally from a
Yeah.
science and a non-science perspective, intention, power, the charge behind things. So why, if we just try to fight all the time this identity that has a thought, well, we end up indulging that identity, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, well, that's just not necessarily true, or it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be. I mean, I have like, and you would agree, the brain, and I mean, what do they say? We have 70,000 thoughts a day or something like that. I mean, holy shit, we can't possibly control every
Yeah.
damn
Yeah.
thought.
The best
So
way to control the thought is to align with get a different identity, self-perception. Then you got okay. This is something I got to share as well. In terms of what we already know about the brain. Okay,
right.
people think that um, my thought I have to control it. I have to be pretty much a watchdog of every thought I have to analyze whether it's in alignment with my goal or not. We actually have plenty of studies that show, you don't have those thoughts for no reason. Your brain, this is another different consistency theory, okay, compared to the first one. Your brain generates thoughts that are consistent and in alignment with your emotional state of being.
Interesting. Yeah.
Your brain, let me repeat it, your brain by default has a function of generating the thoughts that are in alignment with your emotional state of being. What determines what kind of thoughts you're going to have? There have been tons of studies showing that people with anxiety disorder naturally generates more anxiety triggering thoughts, and people with much more positive mindset will naturally generate thoughts that are more in line with that kind of attitude and state of being.
Right. But we can,
The perception,
yeah.
identity, your identity is a big part in determining what kind of emotional state of being you get into naturally. If you are somebody you have enough self-trust, you can be put through the toughest test and still remain hopeful. You still remain positive. You always generate uplifting thoughts to get you out of there.
And also be in the awareness of a completely different trajectory of experiences, things coming toward, even if we were to talk about, like, when I said things flipping for you, one thing that for a moment can appear
Yeah,
totally
you can turn
disastrous,
it.
you
There are
don't
two
you're not perpetuating a snowball effect of this getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, disaster not changing, more and more of the same, which is also confirmation bias if we were going to get into the
exactly.
brain, right? But from a mystic perspective, shifting state and being in a state of this is going to work out for me, or no, I can turn this around, or something's going to shift for me, or etc. etc. But then you're in the awareness in the very least, because you're not even going to be in the perception or the awareness of something available to you or different if you're in the habit of only seeing or having the perspective from a version of self that only thinks from anxiety,
I
stress.
always like to use this analogy. When you're driving down a highway, let's say you're in LA, right? So let's say Highway 101.
Yeah.
All right. You try to get off the exit and get your home. Tell me the exit number.
I don't know, because I don't drive in LA. I hate
Oh,
driving
okay.
in
So let's say you want to get off at exit 20.
LA. Yeah.
Okay. Then you miss that exit. What do? You
Well,
drive off the exit 21. That's what you do.
that's
You
right.
miss this exit. You keep driving and you get off from the next exit.
Right.
Now you won't be feeling stressed out or anxious about it because you're gonna get home anyways. It's just a
Right.
different exit, right? But
Well,
what
some people
happens
are very stressed out.
now?
Some
A
people
lot
get
of
very,
what I'm saying is, I'm using that analogy
yeah.
to illustrate the point. A lot of people, when they have a so-called mistake, like eat the wrong thing or have the wrong thought, whatever it is,
Mm.
they'll be panicking. They'll be panicking for days, and that set them into the state. I mean, just make it easy and get off at the next exit. That's it. You're still
Correct.
gonna get home.
But you could liken this in the same way where you could say, look, if I have the identity that I'm in control of my reality through who I believe myself to be and the way that I perceive things, then in the very least, whether it's about affirming, it's because I'm talking from my world, okay? So what I like to teach, I always like to say, look, things can look not exactly in alignment with what you have selected from an identity. You're saying, okay, look, I have a person, I have this experience, I have a job, I have whatever, I'm rich, whatever it is that they're manifesting. And I believe there's no limits. Okay. It's all coming down to identity. Something for a moment can look funny. It's the perception of that moment that's really going to dictate a trajectory, right? Because otherwise you can shift into a state where you are not in alignment. And if you're in alignment, you say, no matter what, I've made a decision and I'm this identity, things are rolling perfectly. Even that detour for a moment can shift so well and so perfectly and flip so perfectly, but you wouldn't even be in the perception of it if you go down and you're
I'll
dwelling
tell you,
on the.
I'll tell you the biggest distinction between the two types of people who have the identity, who doesn't have the identity. It's not even about how they deal with the gap or they find something goes wrong, how they react
Mhm.
to it. No, it's not even that. The people who are living the identity don't even realize there's a problem or a gap.
True.
So, right, my clients who are addicted to like eating problems or they have the overeating tendency, they or dieting kind of like pressure or identity, they're so aware of every single calorie they overeat.
Yeah.
But the people who are holistic, healthy, and lean, and they don't care about it.
I never think
They
about
they don't
calories.
think about it.
I don't think
Exactly.
about calories.
People,
But people have different beliefs, right? So they it's like, isn't it funny? I don't think about calories, but like everyone has their own story and identity with respect again to certain things.
right, right, right.
So
No,
they, yeah,
we're just talking
yeah,
about like just talk about the
yeah,
same subject matter. So that I just wanted to show the difference between
yeah.
like the identity in this area of life.
Right.
Right. If we're talking about wealth, I work with people who are very wealthy in
Uh-huh.
my career, and I live in Silicon Valley, so some of my clients who are like
Multi-millionaires,
really successful.
billionaires. Yeah.
One of them just sold his company. This is 10 years ago, not just, it was 10 years ago, sold at $480 million,
Uh-huh.
and he's not going to be watchful about his thoughts about wealth. That's the difference.
Yeah.
we don't- he's not going to be watchful about these thoughts. So the distinction, back to what I'm talking about, is it is not even about how you react to it, because that reaction part is natural.
Mm,
If you really live the identity, you will find out that a lot of the thoughts that you're struggling with today, they aren't even under your radar because you have higher goals,
uh-huh.
higher aspiration. You live life on a different dimension.
Yes.
These things are non-issues. You don't have time or bandwidth to even think of these or be aware of these. You aren't aware.
Or try to micromanage. I think this is the mistake with the conscious manifesting to make leaps and bounds. And by the way, Leslie, I do like your website because whilst Leslie is getting very scientific, you do have a 6 minute quantum leap I saw on your
I
website. So
know.
yeah,
Systematic content live showing how people make the jump, right?
totally.
It's
But the
important.
jump is often very much to do with not trying to micromanage. I think this
You
is,
let go.
you
You
just, you
completely let go.
not necessarily of the desire, right? Okay, so the neutrality, the letting go
Yeah,
creates the neutrality. I mean, in the very least, that's at least the way I like to teach it, in terms of an identity that is has made a decision. I am a successful person, or I am the version that's loved, or I have the person,
yeah.
or whatever. Well, it's neutral, isn't it? I mean, that's what Neville was saying all along, all the teachers. I mean, there are literally like the identity that has and the identity that doesn't. Well, who gives a fuck? Pardon my language. Who gives a fuck about the middle? You're there already. You're thinking from that end. So you're not really sitting there and so bothered and so freaking out by every little thing that is like, around you and your like, first of all, we can argue, one, you're not even perceiving it. Like, literally, I mean, this is the other thing. We don't, it's, there's different ways of looking at it. One, your perception's different. So your reactions, if we're talking about a specific person,
A
I've talked
hundred
about that
percent.
a lot, right? Like, you could be day to day dealing with a specific person. You're like, that person's in love with me. A text is going to mean one thing to the version of you that feels loved, and totally different thing to a
Yeah.
version that doesn't feel loved. If it comes down to manifesting something that hasn't fully solidified into material form, but it's already in your awareness, I mean, you're kind of getting on with that identity of like, this is happening, and you usually can close the time gap pretty quickly because you're not in this resistant mode where you are going back into an identity that doesn't have it, and then resisting and looking for all, and then the confirmation bias. It's not
Yeah.
here. Why
Yeah.
isn't it here? Oh my God. And then you're not even taking, like you said, on the higher dimension. I mean, your higher self is directing you. You're taking every right action. It's all working. It's the shortest and the fastest route, I would say, in terms of, now we're going beyond the science, but in
You
terms of the
know,
manifesting.
Kelsey, the biggest paradox here is that to different people, neutrality means different things.
Sure.
right? If you are accustomed to being like living in a certain state or a different experience, allowing that experience is neutral to you.
Mhm.
So it's hard for people if they want to make some quantum shift or become a different identity. I
Mhm.
say in my case, the people who right remove the toxic relationship with food and start thinking about living like holistically healthy and lean person who'd never have to worry about the calories but just naturally lean. That's not naturally neutral to them. Then that creates resistance.
Which is why the manifesting world does talk about this either repetition or consistency. It's either
Yeah.
that repetition of thought because the conscious is then feeding the subconscious and then the ego mind eventually gets bypassed, which I'm not necessarily a person that's a fan of robotically affirming like a man. I'm not a teacher like that, though it
Yeah.
works for many. However, the reason why I believe it does is because of the
Yeah.
belief behind it. So
Yeah.
I like to emphasize belief and I like to say,
Always
look, in
perception
order,
first.
I, in the very least, also because again, I'm more into the consciousness than the science, but I would say, like, because I have a pretty strong belief in I am that I am, or I'm consciousness or God consciousness, then I can, in the very least, have that belief in self that it is whatever I say it is. Therefore, if I have a selection, I know that it is
Yeah.
available to me. Therefore, I can be pretty consistent in
Yeah.
selecting that experience, and it must inevitably materialize as a reflection of my state, as we talked
Yeah.
about, right? So
Yeah.
not so much about having to finagle and manipulate every single thought and every single thing and robotically firm. Though I'm not against it. I always tell people, I'm like, look, you can do whatever gets you into a habit, or but it is consistency. I would agree. You cannot be dominantly in an identity where you have an unhealthy relationship with food, like in your case, what you're talking about, or in my case, when I deal with clients, you can't be dominantly an identity where you're rejected, unloved, the person that you want hates you, that's how you identify with them, and then have the relationship or whatever it is that you're wanting. Like, you can't. So there has to be
Yeah.
either a consistency in returning to your decision that this is who I am,
You have
or
to be
it
adamant about that.
that's the conviction. That's
Yeah.
the faith. That's the conviction. And do you agree that there is also an element, I mean, we could liken this to spiritual awakening or transformation. There is a bit of an element of whether people are battling addiction or wanting massive change in their life or quantum leaps. It's
Yeah.
kind of like coming down to a decision like, I'm just done with this old story. I'm done. Like, I'm finished with this identity. I can't do it
It's
anymore.
a must.
It's
Before
mine.
everybody join me, we have a call. And one of the question I ask very seriously to them is, have you decided that you want to end this now, not like 3 months later?
Right.
Because any kind of transformation, holistic transformation, will require commitment.
To
If
self.
you're to self, exactly, and your brain is going to naturally resist any change you want to implement.
Right.
Because this is what brains do. Our brain don't like it because of fight or flight survival mode. It
Or
doesn't like change. It
like
likes security.
the fear of the unknown. It's like, oh my gosh,
Exactly.
this is
So
new. Yeah,
so here's the paradox is that for anybody who say I want to make a transformation in any field, they face the initial inherent barrier and resistance from their own brain.
sure.
And you're telling me you're not decisive enough. You haven't even decided, forget about it. That's the time
Sure.
when I say we're not good fit.
Well, I really feel like this is like why some people say I can do robotic affirmations and it works, and some people say it doesn't work, or some people,
Yeah.
there is, and most teachers will agree. I mean, some will say just keep embedding in the subconscious, just keep repeating. Eventually, your subconscious is going to accept it, and your subconscious, no matter what, it will happen. Which, to an extent, I agree, but I think it is the faith behind that. It's this
The thing
drive.
is, when
It's this
you're
acceptance. Yeah.
the thing is that when you're aligned, you're in alignment, things
Mm.
happen, flows naturally.
Naturally.
That's the
And
that's a
quickly. And very quickly.
that's experience you want. That's actually the in okay in this area we are working, and I also see in many other areas as well.
Mm.
That's a foundation of sustainability. If you have to work so hard just to get it, think about how much harder it will take just to maintain it.
To maintain it. Well, that's the other thing. That's like where people get hot and cold results, or things can be forced into awareness, or they could get a little bit of something, but then it's like extra hard because it's also this fear that if they don't, also with techniques, etc., it's like people become so addicted to a technique, like they get a little bit of a result, then they
Yeah.
don't realize that it was them behind the technique. So then they
Yeah.
have this fear that if they don't do the technique perfectly or whatever, I mean, that in itself is an addiction. It's like food
That
addiction.
in itself shows that your perception is not there.
Your perception's not there. So
So
it comes
in
down to identity, belief in self, and then I mean, essentially, I believe we're
yeah,
unlimited, and many people who've practiced this have experienced, just like we both agree, like
yeah.
I mean, things that you would call supernatural, right? But it's the belief in self, and sure, consistency in that. And
Oh,
consistency, if you do a technique, it's not a technique to force something, it's a technique to reinforce who you are, that you already
exactly.
are, that you already are now, in the now. Because I
It
noticed you also do take with your clients, you do emphasize
yeah,
the now moment, and all spiritual teachers talk about the now moment. So even a
yeah.
perception a moment ago can be wildly different to who you're being in the now, right? Like you can shift,
It's important. Like who you embody today.
right?
That's the question. I don't care how many pounds you are at this moment, who you embody today.
Right.
So that's a choice, right? It it is very tricky because majority of people I work with, they especially in this country, United States, okay, because they have been embedded so deeply in this diet culture.
Yeah.
Well, everybody around them needs to work so hard, but still are 200 pounds or 300
Mhm.
pounds. They don't believe they can get fit naturally just by treating themselves well. But the thing is, it's very easy for you to find evidence though. If you look at people outside of this country,
Yeah.
if you look at Asia, you look at Japan, for example, China, you look at like Korea, you look at Thailand, you look at Italy, Spain.
It's so different. You're right.
It's so different.
And
So
even in
what
terms of the calories and what is a good food and what is a bad food and the right food, and should you drink wine, should you have pasta, all this sort of stuff. But that also shows you societal programming, individual countries, and then we have collective beliefs and all sorts of things, right?
going
Mhm.
back to what you just said about letting go,
Yeah,
the more people think about these things, you're gonna find that the more their weight is more out of control.
of
Their
course,
eating is more out of control.
because they're
So
identified with it. They're just identified.
identity, exactly. So again, that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. It's not the information, it's not the technique, it's not about how well you've been implementing this manifestation technique or the diet program really well. Okay, it is about really, it starts from who you perceive you are. Because here's the thing, if you perceive yourself as a, if you're able to successfully get in that state, all right. What we do in my program is to help the person restore the sensory
Uh-huh.
experience of that person so that the daily experience actually support that identity so that they build the identity based on real life memory and experiences. But
Hmm.
this is what happens when the identity is there, everything just flows very naturally. You don't need to think, your body knows what to do. It's your instinct. It's your instinct to be able to handle every conversation with
Right,
good logic, clarity, and confidence.
right.
Okay, without the social programming, it's your instinct. It's your instinct to be able to eat just the right amount of the right kind of food to support your health and fitness. It's your instinct to be able to receive money or wealth,
Hmm.
okay,
Or
while
love,
being
we would argue.
or love.
Right. Well,
It's
talk
like
about maternal. Yeah.
but the problem is that the overthinking is really sabotaging, a lot of people's progress and a lot of people's dream here. Because when you're doing that, you're not living on the level that you want to be. It's always lower.
But it's often I mean, look, the thinking is
Yeah,
conscious, but it's often unconscious because the thoughts are running rampant. And but the thing is, it's interesting because we were talking about collective beliefs, and I've talked about this on other live streams individually and with other
yeah,
guests. But isn't it interesting that still identity is behind it? Because, for example, and I specialize in love and relationships, so there is like certain subliminal messaging, like, for example, if you're over a certain age, it's really hard to find love, or everyone on an app is like this, or certain men of this age are like players, or whatever it is. Now, even that, I live in LA, so there would be another girl that thinks that that is true. But why is she identifying as? Is it because she's seen that message over and over? Or is there an aspect of her that identifies with that? Whereas it's like, I don't want to
yeah. It's a
identify
lot of
like
time
that.
is unconscious social wiring. You swipe so many TikTok videos that talks about it, and it gets into your brain, and then you
Correct.
somehow go
Correct,
ahead.
but in tandem with probably all these different individual aspects of you that you might have already had a trauma, you might have already had a disappointment, and then you're very feeding it, and you're very identified with it, and therefore you're also, again, we talked about cognitive bias, more and more of it, and
Yeah,
then you're going to have that, you're going to go
yeah,
into dating scenarios with an expectation, and you're going to be
yeah.
like, so it's interesting. So I think where we do meet, where we agree, is that moment by moment, you have a choice to stop and come to a
Absolutely.
level of awareness and say,
The
first of
release
all,
state.
right, yeah, exact. And who am I being? Okay, who am I being? What is my identity? Which is nobody else's. It's mine. Okay, it's a state.
Yeah,
And therefore, if I align that identity has certain beliefs about self, and
yeah,
therefore what I expect and assume about my environment, people,
yeah,
how I identify in relation to
yeah,
whatever subject or desire or anything, really. Okay.
yeah.
And I think that is maybe where, certainly, so, I mean, you're very conscious, I know, but certainly where science and neuroscience and the mystic and the manifesting world, it meets. I mean, really,
Mm,
ultimately, am I right? Like, you have
absolutely.
that choice.
Absolutely. Your brain is constantly seeking
Wants to
confirmation
prove
of what.
you right for whatever you say. It's like it wants to
Yeah,
validate what you are used to or who you're in the habit of being. I
yeah,
mean, I think
yeah.
that's why Dr. Joe was pretty genius with what he was saying in terms of where he brought in the mystic, where he was like, it's in the sense of like breaking the habit of being a self,
There's one thing I'd
essentially.
like to share with the audience today
Yeah.
is that we are constantly creating memories.
Mm. Oh, yeah, I
Okay.
wanted you to talk about memory actually, Leslie, before we wrap up, because I know we've been on for a long time and you've probably
Yeah,
got somewhere to be. But because this is what my audience struggles with, and it does tie into intrusive thoughts, it does tie into battle of
yeah,
identity. If you would explain about memory, I would
yeah.
love that. Yeah.
So your brain, like we are constantly creating memory.
Mhm.
And memories are data that get registered in your brain. And your brain reflects on these data, which is memory, to come up with your self-perception.
Mm.
Which means that we always have a choice at every minute, every second, in terms of deciding what memory, what data do we want to create and store in this machine. Because that is going to fuel the kind of self-identity and self-perception that projects and determines practically everything. There are many things that we can't control in the world. For example, the happenings, the events, the randomness, that these are out of our control. We
Mhm.
don't need to control these. All we need to do is to make sure that we can switch into the state
With a different
that are
perception.
aligned with our identity
Right.
so that we can navigate this chaos or randomness, but still remain to be in alignment with who we want to be. But ultimately, it's a choice every moment in and now. Like, what at this point, I know I just had a shitty day, I just had a tough conversation, but what memory do I want to create now
Mhm.
for my brain to reflect on to determine my self identity? Because the conversation that happen now, the things that I do right now, the next moment it becomes memory.
Right. and I've rewritten memory and actually had
We,
completely. I've done revision. I mean, that is a mystics tool now,
well, we do that
but
too. We do that
right,
too. Memory
revision.
modulation.
Sure, and
The-
I mean, there's also the scientific idea. Well, but like science and mystic, whatever. But it's like that things exist in superposition. So essentially, perspective changes with you, and so a perspective a moment ago is a different perspective in the now. Am I
Yeah.
right? Theoretically, it could have been seen in a different way or experienced in a different way, but it
Yeah.
was experienced the way that it was in that moment due to state. Correct?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so
What data do you provide? What data do you create now to feed
right.
your computer?
We
Because the
really are like a
computer
computer.
generates
Yeah.
the algorithm
Uh-huh.
that determines everything that in
I
terms of next.
agree.
Yeah.
That I think we can both definitely agree on. I think that, and it is an algorithm, and I've
Well,
actually
there is
mentioned this
a lot of
before.
agreement. There is a lot
Yeah.
of agreement. I
No,
think
no,
we
no.
quite.
And
I think
yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
majority of things that we agree. It's just that some of the things I can't comment on from the perspective
Sure.
of science, but I can comment on these things if the conversation is about my experience.
No, no,
But
I
it's a
agree.
different setting. There are some
No,
certain line
no.
I cannot cross.
No, I appreciate you so much. And I think that this is really good because I think, yes, there's certainly things that science look. And I always say to my audience, and
Yeah,
I say to anyone that I work with, um, you're never going to know stuff until you have your own personal experiences. And there's just
yeah,
stuff that's not explainable. I
yeah,
mean, and there's also stuff science won't can't explain, and there's also something that I can't
yeah,
explain to another person that they're ever going to understand, and what they've had that they could probably not explain, right? So
yeah,
but ultimately it's very interesting, and I'm very excited. I think we're in an interesting age now where we are
yeah,
seeing more and more and more. Science is more and more trying to dig into what is
yeah.
this thing, what is reality, what is reality creation experience, what is consciousness. And so,
Oh,
right, I
that's
mean, it's
that's yeah.
fascinating,
That's a very fascinating topic.
right?
We should definitely dig into it sometime. Yes, in terms
Quantum
of the actual reality.
science, multi-world theory, simulation theory. I mean, I geek out on all of it, and I think that I could go all out there. But I mean, it's fascinating. But again, everything is, yeah, whatever. Everyone's running in their own little states and having their own experiences. So I think that people only know what they know based on what they're open to, what they believe. We definitely both agree that belief is so essential, right? And it is running our reality moment by moment, our beliefs and our states.
Absolutely.
But it's been such a pleasure to have you, Leslie. I mean, this
Same
has been
here.
so enlightening, and it's amazing. And guys, Leslie came in through synchronicity for me, and I manifested her. I'm sorry. I didn't go looking for her, but I had told 4 or 5 different people before Leslie came into my life, serendipitous, we could say, that I don't think there's anything such as
Serendipitously, yes.
right. There's no synchronicity or coincidence, but I had said to even my mum, my dad, and a few friends, I'd been like, I want to have a podcast, even it's manifesting. But I was like, I
Yeah,
want to talk more about consciousness and the mystic
yeah,
with science. And
yeah.
Leslie just fell in my lap. I didn't reach out to her. And I was like, holy shit,
It
there it
was
is.
soft landing, by the way. It didn't hurt.
What's that?
No, I was just joking. I said it was soft landing. It didn't hurt.
No, it
I
did
was just
not. No, it
joking.
was very natural. And it happened, guys. It happened so fast for me. Within 2 weeks of me just saying, that's what I'm going to do, that's what I want. It's happening.
Yeah,
I'm going to have this. And then it
yeah,
just fell in my lap. So, seriously, guys, you're unlimited. And if you
yes,
have a desire for something, just like have some trust and faith in self. Like, okay, there's a reason
yeah,
why this desire and this drive has come to me,
yeah,
and it's happening. It's
yeah,
unfolding. Am
yeah,
I right?
yeah. Manifestation, we should be greedy about it. I was just telling a friend
I think so.
yesterday
Yeah.
that this is interesting to share to the audience here. In back in 2021, so we had a COVID time. So beginning of the year, I was in a very stressful mode. Okay, because of COVID, and I just had a newborn, so hormonal issues and fluctuations. So right before the Chinese New Year Eve, I wrote down a list of 5 things that I would want to experience. And then that was just a whimsical idea, and I acted on it. And right after that, I saw an empty cookie box next to me, so I just put it into the cookie box and I slipped it onto the top of the bookshelf and I forgot about it. 3 years later, we were moving to a different house, and I was unpacking time, right? So I was like, okay, I remember this cookie box. Let me take a look at what I wrote in it. And all 5 items, I didn't realize it before, but all 5 were like realized. And I'm telling you, these are not like small things. It's not just, getting onto the podcast, that kind of thing.
Mm.
2 of the things out of the 5 were actually peculiar, very peculiar. One is being want to be, talked about by some really successful people in the discussion room in a way that is very positive, and now I got confirmation about that just weeks before I reopened the box, the cookie
Yeah.
box. And the other one is being invited to a party at this location by this
Specific,
person.
specific,
The
specific like
very
that.
specific, yes, and it was big deal, by the way. It was very big deal. And then all the general like boring items, like career,
Uh-huh.
business, and the other is traveling to this destination that I didn't even know why I would put it down there. Okay, why would that be that destination? I just followed the idea, and it happened.
I've
And I
done the
did not
same thing.
pursue.
I,
I did
I've
not
done
pursue.
that's what I was going to say. Like, so this is again where the science and the mystic, like this
Mm.
whole thing around even
Le-
action or inaction. I mean, guys, like I've written down things. I mean,
Yeah,
I have a wild. I don't think it's a talent more than another person, but I've noticed that I can
right.
write down things and people will come in and actually say the freaking words that I've
Yeah,
said, like my affirmations within a day or two, like strangers on the street,
yeah,
a person I'm involved with,
yeah,
a friend, or whatever. But
yeah,
like also I've done the same thing as Leslie. I've written things down and
yeah,
I've looked back and I haven't thought about how is it or what is it, and I've not taken any kind of action, like just like Leslie just falling in my lap for this conversation.
yeah,
But I've done nothing. And
yeah.
so whether we could say that's like a quantum shift, or whether we could
Oh,
say, you're
when you're doing nothing, you are
subconsciously,
not resisting.
you're not resisting. So anyway, it's a very interesting conversation, and I really appreciate your time so so much. So guys, look, the bottom line is self-belief, identity. Stick to your identity.
Yeah,
Don't worry too much. Don't battle with the identity that you don't prefer. Am
yeah,
I right?
yeah,
It's like have that
absolutely.
belief in self. You're unlimited. And now
Yeah.
you have a bit of the science and the brain perspective. So thank you so much to Leslie with all her knowledge. And we love you so much. And thank you for
I had a
coming on.
blast talking with you, Kelsey, and continue doing the great work, okay? And we'll
Thank
catch up.
you. And you too. And guys, if you want to know more about Leslie, I will put her information in the description box of the video. The live will be reposted on YouTube. And if any of you are interested in her coaching, though she specializes with food and food addiction. But if you're interested in learning more, you can go to her website. You can check her out. And I love you, Leslie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day, guys.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.